Women and children first, I call as my eyes scan the deck, moving quickly away from the gazes of men that surround me. Some look at me pleadingly, while others look down, avoiding my stare, knowing that their turn may never come. My voice only carries so far, though, as a hissing noise is emanating from deep within the bowels of the ship. And mixed with that is cheery ragtime music, which the orchestra has been playing for the past 2 hours. Everything has been rather calm and organized up until this point, 2:10 a.m. on April 15th, 1912. It was a struggle at first to induce women and children to board the precarious lifeboats hovering hundreds of feet above the water. My eyes stung with tears as I watched them say farewell to their husbands. The wails of children and the whispers of mothers uttering words of comfort echoed out into the night as I lowered them slowly into the dark sea below. But now panic has taken hold. The bow is underwater and the last of the lifeboats are being boarded. The warning shot of a pistol is fired, not too far away from me, as it is now more than clear there isn't going to be enough room. More boats. We need more boats. What about these? Collapsible A and B still remain, but they have less space. Men hurry to move them off the roof and onto the deck, while groups of desperate passengers swarm like bees. The orchestra is preparing to play their last song, a sort of death hymn, as water makes its way onto the boat deck. 2:15 a.m., no help has come, and the stern is high up in the air. Water everywhere, all over the deck. The collapsibles, one flipped upside down, start to simply float away, with passengers clinging on for dear life. The prayers of priests are overtaken by the sound of loud cracks, like gunshots. One of the ship's funnels, 4 or 5 stories tall, comes toppling down. Smoke curls out of a whirlpool that begins to suck passengers in. The lights of the ship gently flicker, and then we're plunged into darkness. I can feel the ship bending, cracking underneath me. The stern rises up. Like an elevator, it slips into the sea as I cling to the railing. And then cold, so cold. 2:20 a.m. and all I can see is thrashing in the water. And all I can hear are the cries of hundreds of people for help.
Hi, I'm Kelly.
I'm Molly.
And I'm Bronwyn.
And welcome to This Might Be True, the podcast where we separate fact from film fiction. Today, we are looking at the 1997 film Titanic. Yes!
So excited.
So excited. Okay, before I thought I'd throw this out to you guys. Do you remember seeing the film at the cinema at the theater?
I do. So in 1997, it came out in December. So I think I probably saw it in January of 98. So I was either 8 or 9 years old, which was, I think, a little young for some of the content. And I went with my best friend at the time. Her mom took us with she had a lot of siblings, with a bunch of her siblings. And what's funny is that it's a long movie. I don't remember ever being bored for that age, given the length. I was quite enthralled. But yeah, when the ship started to go down, I remember looking kind of to the left of me, and my mom's friend was just sobbing, complete mess of tears. And I remember being like, whoa, because I never really seen my parents cry. They're not very emotional people. Sorry, mom and dad. But they're not big movie criers. But obviously my friend's mom was just losing it. And then I remember looking around the rest of the theater too, and everyone was in tears. And I was like, wow, this is heavy. When people jumping off the ship, and I was like, this is really sad. And I didn't totally break down in tears, but I do remember thinking later, and also now that I'm older, being like, is that a little young to maybe have watched the film?
9, yeah.
Yeah. But I made it through. I liked it. And then, Bronwyn, you never actually went and saw it in theaters.
So I have 2 distinct memories. One is being in my bedroom and cleaning or hanging out, and I had a big boom box and listening to the radio, and they were playing the song over and over and over. And I think at that point I maybe hadn't even like seen the movie still yet. I didn't see it until it came out for rental. And I remember renting it with my childhood friend, and she lived like just up the street from us. So we like put in the movie, watching. We get like, there's all the Jack and Rose, there's all the nice stuff on the ship. Then the ship starts to go down, and she was literally like, all right, I'm gonna go home. And I was like, what? And she was like, yep, I've seen this before. I know what happens from here on out. See ya. And I just like by myself sat and watched the sad
She
end of it.
abandoned you.
Yeah,
She
she
literally
was- yeah.
abandoned ship. She was
Yeah,
like, I'm
yeah.
going.
Yeah. Which was a little bit like I was like, I already had a sense that it was this like dramatic, that everybody cried. And, if you remember, I don't know, Kelly, for you, but like when they used to play the song on the radio, they had like an extended version with like clips. Like
Oh, I
You could
don't
like hear them
actual
talking.
clips from the movie.
Yeah.
Like, so I
Okay.
knew
Let go,
all of the like,
Jack,
never let
whatever.
go, never let,
Yeah,
like I
yeah.
knew, I had a sense of like what it was, but her up and leaving was me just like, oh, okay,
This is gonna
all
get
right.
dark.
Yeah, like,
Okay, so
Yeah.
for me, I'm actually not ashamed to admit this. So I was, what was I, 13 in 1997? And I was Leo obsessed, like so many people of that age. And I went and saw the film 10 times at the cinema.
Good customer.
You are welcome, James Cameron. I
and so
was
you
obsessed.
you sat through every time, you sat through all the
Every
sad
time,
stuff.
yeah. That's not even the most times I went to the cinema. I went and saw the first Lord of the Rings film, 12.
My goodness,
I also saw
enthusiasm.
that in theaters with the same family of friends, actually. They were really big
Oh,
into
there you
seeing
go.
movies when they just came out.
Amazing.
Yeah.
But this was big. It's hard to explain how big this event was when this film came out because, and we'll get into it, but it was a huge film event, and there was so much riding on it, whether or not it would be successful. It's one of those films that a lot of adolescent girls had a huge part in making it as successful as it was. And we were those girls back in those days. So, Molly, you gave us a really great, literally jumped us right into this event at that moment of sinking as a person, someone on board who's actually enduring this tragedy. Would you be able to take us back and tell us what was the Titanic and what happened to it?
So it was a boat. And at the time of when it existed, it was considered the largest object ever to move on the water. But because she was so large, she wasn't the fastest. And that's kind of a misnomer. It was big, but it wasn't the fastest. There were other ones like Cunard's Lusitania, the Mauritania as well, were always going to be faster. But it was a big ass ship. So it was made in Belfast, and then in 1911 in May was when it first made its way onto the water. It's also estimated that like 100,000 people, 1/3 of the population in Belfast, were also watching that over a minute-long launch. So it caused a big stir. People were very interested to see, like, can it float? I guess was the big question. If it's that big, So obviously it drew a lot of people, and it had a reputation. It was never actually described as unsinkable. It was claimed by its builders to be practically unsinkable. So it wasn't totally unsinkable. What's that line in the movie? It's made of iron, sir. But of course,
Yeah.
it could sink. But it was pretty impressive, I think, for the time, that it was so large. And then, of course, its maiden voyage, so it did leave Belfast and become, like, seaworthy. And then it had its first maiden voyage, which was from Southampton to New York City. And there were, of course, a lot of immigrants on it who were trying to get to America and start a new life. There were a lot of, especially steerage or third-class passengers who didn't even speak English, and yeah, they had all their belongings, all of their worldly treasures with them, and this was them coming to America. So there were a lot of people on this boat, 2,223 passengers and crew. And well, as anyone who might be familiar, Titanic didn't make it to New York City. So it did hit an iceberg. And the iceberg may have jutted out 100 feet above water, and they only had something like less than 60 seconds to even try to divert its path. It kind of created an optical illusion. The sea was very calm that night, and it kind of mirrored the stars. So, like, the iceberg was essentially like kind of hidden. It was very hard to perceive with their eyes up in the crow's nest. They also did not have binoculars because they had been locked up, and the guy who had the key to the cabinet wasn't on the ship.
Like, that's something you would have expected someone to have in the crow's nest at that time. It's just
Although
surreal that they were.
I read that's kind of like, would it have helped? I mean, kind of, but maybe not, because again, it was so dark. And the iceberg kind of had this reflectiveness to it that it was very hard to see. They did see it, but they didn't really have enough time to totally get out of its path. So it did kind of hit the edge of it, and it created a 300-foot gash in the hull of the boat. I also was reading theories that maybe it would have been better if they just gone head on to the iceberg. It was them scraping against it that created the major damage. If they just hit it straight on, I guess there would have been a lot of injuries because people would have been like flung right inside the ship. But I don't know if there's theories that it may have not gone down. But
Well, she was
nevertheless,
designed to float if so many of the compartments were, but because of that gash, it filled up, I think, like 6 or so.
it could handle 4, but once the 5th was breached, it was too late. Yeah, too much water was going to
And
come
like
in for the
breaking
pumps to
news
get out.
from 2025, right? Breaking news from 2025 is that they just finished their like the latest digital scan of the ship, and that's essentially what it revealed was that they said they were holes the size like as big as like a piece of paper, as like thin, like a very small in between the different pieces, like where all the rivets were. So it was just like the perfect accident that was seemingly so minor, but was like minor in the worst way for the way the boat was constructed.
I think one of the mistakes was that they didn't release its first lifeboat until an entire hour had elapsed. So they should have just got it going right away. And then that brings us to the lifeboats. There were not enough lifeboats, and the first few were not fully loaded. So over half of the people could have survived if they had loaded the lifeboats fully, but they didn't, so less than a third aboard survived. So that's pretty tragic. There's also like, well, why didn't they have enough lifeboats? Some theories I read was that they never really anticipated this to happen per se. The lifeboats were really only to ferry passengers to somewhere else in case they hit some kind of issue, right? They never, I guess, really expected to have to take everybody off, right?
Yeah, I think the idea was that it was like as if you were going to have your tire blow on a highway, right? And you can pull over, and at some point someone else is going to come along and you can flag them. And yeah, like it wasn't this sense of like you were out there in the wilds of the unknown ocean. It was like, no, this was like major traffic, right?
Yeah, at first it was kind of like, oh, get in the lifeboat. And people are like, really? Right? And then it's like, oh no, now we can actually see that water is getting in. It started to visibly, what do they call it? List. It started to visibly tilt. And then it got serious, and there was a massive panic to try to get on the lifeboats, which they knew there were not going to be enough. And Captain Smith did apparently kind of mention the women and children first, but they believed that maybe that was taken a little too seriously, in that they kind of interpreted it as only, when obviously they should just try to get as many people off. But that was kind of another chaotic aspect, is that they were only putting in the women and children. And as I always say to Brahman when we were talking about it, I'm like, but what's the point of that? Because these were women in the 1910s. They didn't have jobs. What are they going to do if their husband goes down on this ship? And then even for the immigrants too, like, it's going to be hard to convince them to leave behind their worldly possessions and get on a lifeboat too. Like, I can see why there would have been hesitancy, and yeah, it was kind of a mess in terms of trying to get them all off the boat. And by the time people realized there weren't enough spots and maybe really wanted one, it was too late. And at 2:20 a.m. on the 15th of April, 1912, it slipped beneath the surface, and now it can be found 12,600 feet underwater.
And the crazy thing too is to think that this was, like you said, the biggest thing that had floated on
Yeah.
water. And in 2 hours, it disappeared underneath the surface and was not seen again for 70
Mm-hmm.
years.
I think one more thing I should mention was the Californian. So there was a ship that was closer than the Carpathia. The Carpathia was like 4 hours away, so they weren't going to make it in time, but they did get the distress call and kind of went into action quite quickly. But there was a closer ship. And I was kind of doing some digging into that because it was like, well, why didn't they come and help? They were much closer. They could actually see it with binoculars, or the Californian could see the Titanic with binoculars. And then when it sunk under, they just assumed, oh, it went away. Must have continued on. Like they didn't even like question it. And they were shooting off flares, as we see in the movie. But apparently, the way you're supposed to do it if you're like in trouble is you shoot off a flare one every minute. And the Titanic was doing it only about every 8 minutes. So the Californian, some of the people that saw the flares just thought it was them, like the Titanic or whatever boat it was, communicating with some other shipping merchant. They didn't read it as an emergency, which is so tragic because they saw it and then disregarded it. And ultimately, the guy that did the wireless radio did not wake up. They didn't wake him up. And so it wasn't until 4 a.m. that he got up and then heard all of the distress calls and was like, uh-oh. And the captain of that ship was badly criticized, rightly so, for ignoring an emergency.
One of the good things about the Titanic is that it did actually change a lot of the ways.
Yes.
They did inquiries. It wasn't like a common thing for a boat that size to go down and for that many people to be lost. So that was a good thing to come of it, is that there was like, okay, everybody needs to have somebody on the radio at all times. Okay, we need to make sure there are theoretically enough lifeboats for everybody. Like all of that got changed.
They did have the first International Convention for Safety of Life at Sea. That was called in London in 1913. And that is when they drew up rules requiring that every ship have lifeboat space for each passenger embarked, that lifeboat drills be held, because that was something they didn't do on the Titanic, was a muster drill. So the crew weren't even really that familiar with how to get the lifeboats out and ready. And again, because the Californian had not heard the distress signals, ships have to maintain a 24-hour radio watch. And even an international ice patrol was established. There was evidence that Titanic maybe was getting warnings of the icebergs, and the Californian was actually stopped for the night because of so many icebergs. They had called it a night, essentially, which I guess is why their radio operator was asleep during the disaster. But yeah, there clearly were mistakes made. Not enough lifeboats, not enough communication. And luckily, hopefully, we won't ever have a maritime disaster like this again, this size, because, of course, now they understand the importance of these things.
And they say that then when they were all in the lifeboats and the sun finally came up and they were like starting, the Carpathia was like approaching, they were literally surrounded by icebergs. Like as soon as the light was up, they could see them all around them. So it was literally like a minefield of icebergs.
Although they didn't admit this, there is theories too that the captain of the Californian maybe wasn't too eager, even if he maybe knew about the distress calls, which he said he didn't, but like he wasn't too eager to move the ship because they had already stopped for the night because of the icebergs. So there was a pretty big risk even in going to save the Titanic because of all these bergs. We could have had two ships instead of one go down, I guess is the theory. Although I don't think that's an excuse. They should have, when they saw the flares, gotten the damn radio operator up and being like, hey, do you want to like send a message and see if that ship's okay? But it never happened. Yeah, they just assumed it was, and then it was gone, and they were like, oh, okay, whatever.
Goes down in history as people who
Yep.
didn't wake people up, like when they didn't wake Hitler up on D-Day. And they were like, we'll just let him sleep. Shall we talk about the film? Titanic was released in December 1997, and it was directed by James Cameron. So James Cameron, at this point, he had done quite a few successful films. He had done The Terminator, he'd done Aliens, The Abyss, Terminator 2, which I think is one of the rare second films to surpass, the brilliance of the first. When Titanic came out, it was like the most expensive film that had ever been made at that point. Its budget had ballooned, and it was about $200 million. Just the dollar value of this film was insane, $200 million at the time, which, nowadays we expect those kinds of budgets for big blockbusters. We do tend to see that, but at that time, had not. It did end up grossing $1.84 billion. So they made their money back and then some. And it was the highest grossing film of all time until 2009 when Avatar surpassed it, which is also James Cameron. So he surpassed himself. I like the tagline for this because I had never realized the tag. Do you know the tagline for Titanic?
No.
Nothing on earth could come between them.
If I heard that out of context and you were like, what movie is this? I would not have been able to say Titanic.
And also,
no.
Spoiler alert, a door came between them. But anyway. So the tagline is nothing on earth could come between them. And the summary is a 17-year-old aristocrat falls in love with a kind but poor artist aboard the luxurious, ill-fated RMS Titanic. The romance was always going to be the thing. For James Cameron, it was always going to be a romantic story. And he really, really liked the artwork of Ken Marshall. Ken Marshall he'd paint these beautiful paintings of Titanic. He has a book, many perhaps, but he had one that had all these lovely pictures of Titanic. And this is pre the film. And James Cameron, he was such a fan of shipwrecks in general and had this book. And when he went to the studio to say he wanted to make this film, he literally just opened the book to the painting that Ken had made of the ship going down. And he said, this plus Romeo and Juliet. And that's how he pitched the film. And it's interesting because the fact that he said, like, okay, first, yes, this is absolutely going to be a romance, and also the fact that he'd mentioned Romeo and Juliet, and he has as his lead actor, he casts Leonardo DiCaprio, Romeo himself. So Leonardo DiCaprio I believe he was about 23 when he shot this film. Leonardo had done What's Eating Gilbert Grape, which was, he had a fantastic performance in that film. He had done The Basketball Diaries, which was a very gritty film. He had done This Boy's Life, and then he had done Romeo and Juliet. And I think when it was being cast, because Leonardo was not actually James Cameron's first choice, the first person that James Cameron wanted to cast was Johnny Depp. So Johnny Depp was offered the role, but actually turned it down. Supposedly it was one of the biggest regrets of his career. And studios, this is interesting. Do you know who the studios wanted?
Well, yeah.
I know. No, and as I tell you who these people were, it's kind of funny when you play that game in your head, because so if Johnny Depp had been cast, I could have seen Johnny do it more than this actor, because the studios wanted Matthew McConaughey.
Can you imagine, like, dazed and confused Matthew McConaughey?
One of the things about Leonardo was not, he had to be persuaded. I believe because Kate Winslet had been cast, and she had been cast first, and she actually she really did want Leo to get that role as well, so she was part of helping to persuade him to do so.
I feel like young Kate Winslet was felt about Leo the way we were all feeling about Leo, and was like,
she's like, if I'm gonna spend this adventure with someone, let it be Leonardo DiCaprio. Yes, and thank you.
They have great chemistry. I think that helps a lot.
I think if any film was gonna trauma bond you in terms of the process that you go through to film it, after you've spent 8 weeks in a water tank together, I think peeing on each other or
exactly.
You're gonna get real close.
There is I don't have the information on me, but there is a count of how many times Jack says Rose and how many times Rose says Jack in that film, and it is a large number.
It's one of my pet peeves with screenwriting, because I feel like normally in conversations, especially if it's only you and one other person, you are not saying someone's name. Very, very rarely. You're not like, Kelly, listen, Kelly. So Kelly, Kelly, I think we need, should we go now, Kelly? Kelly, do you have your bag? It's
they say you don't. It so much. Rose, Rose, do this, Rose, Rose. Oh my God, Rose, you're so stupid, Rose, Rose. I love you, Rose.
I love you so much, Rose.
Back on the boat, Rose, Rose. She's like, Jack, Jack. Jack.
Yeah.
I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. And yet I saw it 10 times at the cinema. So who am I to talk? And so Leonardo came on board finally after some persuasion. And Kate Winslet had already been cast, and she had done roles in Heavenly Creatures. That was her first film role with Peter Jackson. She'd done Sense and Sensibility. She had done things in her homeland of England, but this was the film that would really propel her into the Hollywood sphere and into the minds of the world, really, because after that, her career took off. We have the fantastic Billy Zane as Cal Hockley. And interesting fact, that role was offered to and turned down by none other than Hugh Grant. So just imagine that for a second.
Oh, interesting. I think he could have done a good job of
I
that
think he could have
too.
done a
But
good job too, but
yeah,
Billy Zane in that role was so captivating. He played it to perfection. Then we have the great Kathy Bates as Molly Brown, who was a real person. And then we have Bill Paxton. He plays Brock Lovett, who is on the ship, on the modern day ship. He's the one who's searching for the heart of the ocean, the necklace that Rose was given to by Cal. And Bill Paxton actually is one of the I wouldn't say few, but it's one of the actors that has continuously worked with James Cameron, and
yeah, yeah.
he did The Terminator, he did Aliens with James Cameron. And Bill Paxton is no longer with us. Rest in peace. We love him dearly.
Oh,
And yeah, he passed away. There were many historical characters there were many characters within the film that are based on real people. And, you've got Margaret Molly Brown that Kathy Bates played, and she was dubbed the unsinkable Molly Brown because she, with the help of other women, actually tried to commandeer Lifeboat 6 that she was on to go back and rescue more people. She was unsuccessful in doing so, but she was known for being quite a vocal, kind of modern. I think you would say she was quite a modern woman for the time.
when she got on the Carpathia, she was really active in getting the Carpathia passengers to donate to the women who had, well, lost their husbands and everything. So even after this traumatic incident, she was going around on the boat being like, hey, you got some money, help out these people, come on.
But there are other historical characters in there. There's the Thomas Andrews, the ship's builder, played by Victor Garber. There's Bernard Hill plays Captain Edward John Smith, who obviously was a real character. J. Bruce Ismay, who's the the White Star Line's managing director, played by Jonathan Hyde. He's very snooty, and he's the one that actually is telling the captain that they should go faster, to try and get in there on time and, make a big splash. I'm like, well, they did. And there's plenty of others, and there's you can go, the list is basically quite long of how many people within the cast are actually based off of real people. And that really does come down to James Cameron's passion for the history of the Titanic, and he really did vast research. He spent 6 months researching the Titanic when he decided that he wanted to make this film. The inspiration actually came from first his love of shipwrecks. It's just something that he's loved since he was young. And he also was inspired by the 1958 film A Night to Remember, which was based on a book from 1955 of the same name. And you guys saw that, right?
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's interesting with that movie because I would say if you're interested in the Titanic, I mean, we're not really going to discuss it in any major detail today, but if you are interested in the Titanic, it's totally worth seeing. It's interesting to see the effects and then even just how it inspired this movie. But Molly and I were saying there is no plot. The plot is the boat sinking, and in terms of anything more, you get a little sense of people's relationships to each other. There's some drama. Obviously, there's dialogue, but in terms of anything close to what Cameron did with the Jack and Rose story, that is,
Yeah, that it's not there.
and I appreciate because when you do have this kind of cold list of just real people, it's hard to put a story onto that. And I think there's maybe hesitancy in terms of how much you're going to you don't want to take a real couple and have them having an affair or
Yeah.
that's a little icky. So I can appreciate being we need more of a story because that was one of the things that's really kind of missing in the 58 movie.
Right.
But yeah, you can't do that with it all just being completely deadly accurate to the lists that you have. And one of the great things about the structure that James Cameron chose for this is that he also has that framing story around, so there's like the romance in the time period of the Titanic, but then he was so obsessed with, like, he had got himself down to the wreck, so he wanted to get that footage of the wreck in there because he knew how cool that was to see as well. So that's the smart thing in terms of the way he set this up, is that you've got that like teeny little window of a story in the beginning of this guy who's exploring the wreck, trying to find the necklace, and then tracking down old Rose in her old age. And then that's the nice like sort of thread through at the end.
Yeah, it has these bookends. You've got, the Brock character trying to find the heart of the ocean, this incredible diamond that, they have heard existed, but they've never seen it. And then they in one of these submersibles, they find in the safe a drawing of Rose, the drawing that Jack drew of Rose wearing only the heart of the ocean necklace. And that's where they realize, and they put it on, I think it on a news, someone picks it up, and that's where old Rose is like,
she's like,
sees it.
That's
And she's
me.
like, that's me. And so that's how she ends up being invited onto this ship. And that's where she tells her story, which I always think is really funny. She's just sort of sitting there telling them. And then we went down into where the cars are kept and we got it on.
With believability, I'm like, you survived the Titanic and you want to get on a helicopter and get on this boat that's exploring the Titanic? Like, I'm surprised she's so gung-ho to do that.
Molly, I think it's a good time to note that none of this is true.
There's no old Rose. She's not in my historical characters.
I don't even know if that woman that old should get on a helicopter.
So I mean, it's very much it's a disaster movie. It is a romance movie. It is a drama. It is a tragedy. It sort of intercuts between all these different genres. What it was an extremely successful movie. It actually in the end, it got nominated for 14 Academy Awards and won 11, including Best Picture, Best Director. It has been selected for the Library of Congress preservation in the United States National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. So it's kind of incredible because when it was being made, it absolutely was not thought of as being a film that would be successful. And so James Cameron was born in Canada. His films have grossed over $8 billion worldwide. So he is now the second highest grossing film director of all time after Steven Spielberg. But interesting fact is Susie Amos. I don't know if you know her name, but she plays Lizzie Calvert, who is Old Rose's granddaughter. And she has also been married to James Cameron since 2000. So they met on that film. He was still married to Linda Hamilton at the time. They had been separated, though. They weren't like living together. I did read a quote where Linda basically said that Titanic was part of the reason that they separated, his obsession with this film and how it took over their life, really. But he was actually also married to fellow director Catherine Bigelow from 1989 to 1991. And in fact, were they not up when she was up for Hurt Locker? Was he up for Avatar?
She won Best Director Oscar for Hurt Locker, and she was the first woman to win Best Director. So I think it's good that she beat out her ex-husband.
Also, The Hurt Locker, I really enjoyed that film. So basically, his passion for these deep sea explorations is what drove Titanic. He didn't actually really want to make a film per se at the start. He just wanted to go and do these deep sea dives. And so he actually basically just sort of, I think he needed the money to sort of fund this exploration. And he kind of just played it out like, yeah, I'll make a movie. Because he did say it at a TED conference in February 2010, he stated, secretly what I wanted to do was I wanted to dive to the real wreck of Titanic, and that's why I made the movie. And he said that all my films are love stories. And that is kind of true to a certain extent. Like if you think of like Terminator, you've got a love story within that. Within Aliens, you've even got like kind of a mother-daughter type love story. There's always love at the heart of the films. It's funny when you think about that because you don't really associate James Cameron necessarily in that way. But he said that all my films are love stories, but in Titanic, I finally got the balance right. It's not a disaster film. It's a love story with a fastidious overlay of real history. So that's how he described it. They actually shot the Titanic wreck in the Atlantic Ocean 12 times in 1995. So when you are watching the film and you're seeing the submersibles down, what you're seeing that footage is actually what he shot down of the Titanic. He is very much a stickler for history when it comes to this film. He actually had Harland and Wolff, Titanic's builders, they opened their private archives to the crew and they shared blueprints that were previously thought lost. And for the ship's interiors, the production designer, who was Peter Lamont, he looked at artifacts from that era. And it was massive. I mean, Fox acquired 40 acres of waterfront south of Playas de Rosarita in Mexico, began building the studio, like a new studio, in May 1996. And the Horizon tank that they used had 17 million gallons for water. And then they built the exterior of the reconstructed ship. It was built to full scale. Like they built this ship that was able to tilt so that they could actually shoot those, sinking scenes. Like it was absolutely insane, the cost of this film. And you can imagine the studios just like, what's happening? And I read somewhere that at some point when they were doing the lighting and figuring out the cabling that they would need, they came up with their like figure of how much they needed for the cabling, and the studio was like, that's not right, let's send someone in. And the person went and checked it and was like, they undervalued how much they need more.
And I have to say, like, it makes rewatching the film, considering that it was 97 and it's 2025, it is astounding how good it looks. Like, I'm so appreciative that they put that much money into doing as many practical effects and like having a real set and everything, because it looks great.
Because
like
today they would just probably use visual effects to create that ship, but there's something about that real, it's tangible, it's there, it's present, and it feels, I mean, it's one of the main characters of Titanic is the Titanic, so it's something that needed to be physical.
Cameron said that when they sunk their version of the Titanic, the main staircase lifted up and floated out, and that was when they realized that that was what happened with the real boat, because it wasn't there in the wreck. Then it was like 5 stories of stairs, and they were like, that's kind of weird. And then when they sunk his on set, they were like, oh, there you go, because the wood is lighter, so it like pops up and lifts out, and there you go.
To just sort of get the interior sets of Titanic, they used photos and plans from the builders to try and, really capture like as much as they could to get it right. He had on set, he hired the historians David Lynch and Ken Marshall, who authenticated the historical details. So he was very much about trying to get everything to the cutlery to, you can actually see pictures of the set with pictures of the actual Titanic wreck and sort of see how they've actually included some of those details in there. The boat deck and A deck were working sets, and then the rest of the ship was steel plating. And there was a 50-foot lifting platform for the ship to tilt during the sinking sequences. And then there was the 60-foot, which was a 1/8 scale of the stern section, which was designed by the naval architect J. Canola, using plans of the Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic. So principal photography began in 1996 in Nova Scotia. So the first day on set for Kate Winslet was she had to be naked in front of the entire crew. James Cameron said that he had little choice because the set wasn't ready, so they couldn't do these other scenes. So he was like, okay, we're going to have to do that. He said, it wasn't by any kind of design, although I couldn't have designed it better. There's a nervousness and an energy and a hesitance in them. And it's quite true. So if you think about that scene, you've got Jack sitting there drawing her, and that's their first scene. You do kind of get this kind of lovely tension there, and I think it does actually work very, very well. And maybe it wouldn't have been exactly the same because they became such close, dear friends. You might not have had that. Yeah, so it worked out really, really well. The actual artwork of Kate herself, of Rose, was done by James Cameron. So he actually drew that himself, and she posed in a bathing suit for him, just to add that in. She was not naked in front of him to do that. But this was really crazy. So he built his ship. James Cameron's Titanic was built on the starboard side to do with basically because a study of weather data revealed it was a prevailing north to south wind, which blew the funnel smoke. So that posed a problem for them because the ship was in Southampton, was docked on its port side. So what they did is they basically reversed everything. So if somebody was walking to their right in the script, they had to walk to their left. And post-production, everything was flipped. And so even like things like buttons and stuff on costumes, like everything had to be considered and signs had to be backwards because everything was going to be flipped in like that detail is insane when you really think about it. So filming was meant to last 138 days, but it ballooned. Everything ballooned. It went up to 160. Cast got sick. Kate Winslet, supposedly she nearly quit because she got pneumonia so bad. She was in those, like the water tank in the freezing cold. I think it was Leonardo didn't like to film unless it was cold to kind of really get the real reaction. And
Method.
Kate, method, right? And Kate actually was, she got sick quite a bit. Most of them got sick. She was in the water a lot, I think, more than any of them. So she was like that scene where she's like getting the axe.
I was
And you
gonna
could just
say
see on
that's
her
all
face.
her
She's just like, oh
like,
my God, oh my God, oh my God. Yeah.
And she's in that coat, and I'm like, take off the coat. Like
Take it
the whole
off. I
time I was
know.
like, tie your skirt like up around your waist or something. Like the fashion, I can't imagine. Like,
Okay, so this is crazy, but on the final night of shooting, they were in Nova Scotia, and to this day, we don't know who did this, but somebody put drugs into the clam chowder that was served to the cast and crew.
I thought that it's clam chowder, like not cocktails.
Supposedly, it was the dissociative hallucinogen PCP, also known as angel dust. Now, 80 people got sick from this. More than 50 were taken to the hospital. Thank God, Gloria Stewart, who was 87 years old and played Old Rose, had dined elsewhere. They thought that maybe it was like shellfish poisoning or something like that, but it says when James Cameron noticed that one crew member was demanding to see a priest, the director of photography was leading a conga line. He realized that something else was going on.
That's so funny.
Oh, yeah, and the assistant director was talking to Cameron over a walkie-talkie while looking straight at him. But they never knew, but they sort of suspected maybe it was James Cameron himself suspects it was like an ex-crew member maybe. And you know, it's from the things you hear about his sets, maybe someone just got really mad. But wow, what a way to prove a point. I mean, geez, very dangerous. So basically the like cost of it ballooned, as we said, to $200 million, which was like it's over $1 million a minute of screen time. It was so expensive. The executives were panicking, and it's kind of conflicting, but supposedly James Cameron forfeited $8 million up front of his salary and percentage of the initial gross. I don't know if the actual studio accepted that because supposedly they had rejected his forfeit offer and were legally obliged to pay him an undisclosed sum. So I'm not really sure, but there was, I guess he thought himself like, yeah, this is going to cost. We don't know that this is going to be successful. People just did not think it was going to be successful. Even James Cameron himself. I mean, he obviously knew what he was doing in his gut, but when you have the studio being like, this is going to be a bomb, and they all expected it to be a bomb and thought that they were going to make mass loss, which probably would have completely bankrupted the studio. So it was very much it was seen as something that was going to bomb. And of course, we know it very much didn't. Originally, when James Cameron was writing Titanic, he wanted Enya. He was listening to her work, but she declined an invitation to compose it. And so he instead chose James Horner, who he had worked with before, but they had not worked together for something like 15 years. And he used the beautiful singing that you hear, that haunting, beautiful singing is by a Norwegian singer, Sissel. So she did the vocals throughout the film. And Horner wrote My Heart Will Go On. And we know that now to be an absolutely iconic song associated with the film. But James Cameron did not actually want a song. He doesn't like, I suppose, lyrical music, like songs like that in his films. So Horner wrote it in secret and got Celine Dion at the encouragement of her husband Renee to, even Celine needed a little encouragement to do it. So she recorded it with James Horner, who then had to kind of keep it and then waited until James Cameron was in a good enough mood to be like, by the way, and I guess he heard it and he was like, okay. And you know, and it just plays in the credits at the end.
I was going to
That's
say
when
we
you
don't hear it until the credits. Yeah,
It's just the credits, but it became so it played like you can't really fathom unless you were there how often this song played. And it was recreated. You play that and people would pretend to be like on the ship with like, I'm flying, Jack.
I had that memory of hearing it on the radio. That was Z95 in Vancouver, and I remember they had to like say a message to callers to be like, stop calling and requesting that we play it because we can only play it. And it was something like 3 times an hour or like 2 times an hour. It was like literally like it doesn't, we know you want to hear it like nonstop. We can't do that. So please, like, know that we're playing it like legally as many times as we can for what we can. Leave us alone. Like, that's what like, I remember, like, the DJ, like, interrupting the songs to be like, okay, and if you're calling us to ask about My Heart Will Go On, it's coming right up, and, like, please stop calling us. Like, literally.
I mean, the soundtrack was best-selling album of 1998 and made over $27 million.
What's funny is like initially when I was doing the research for this, I was like, okay, Titanic, 1997. It must have been because the song was so popular. I was like, this has got to be the top song of 1997. It was not. It was the top song of 1998. Unfortunately, in 1997, Princess Diana died.
Of course.
So the top song was Candle in the Wind
Candle in
by
the
Elton
Wind.
John. So that was like back to back though, two like massively and is massively, I think the sales for Candle in the Wind was like 3 times that of Titanic. So like it was like that was 2 years where you could not get away from these songs.
You
like,
were we were grieving.
Songs.
We were grieving Princess Diana and we were grieving Jack. For years.
Yeah.
So James Cameron actually refused to hold the world premiere in Los Angeles and instead did it in Tokyo, which supposedly the studio wasn't super happy with.
Kind of weird. At first, when you were saying that, I was thinking it was going to be like, and instead wanted to hold it somewhere relevant to the Titanic. No, Tokyo.
Nova Scotia or something. Yeah.
No, it was Tokyo International Film Festival, November 1st, 1997, and the reaction was described as tepid by the New York Times.
It happens all the time, I feel like, with these hit movies. We were talking about it in my classical Hollywood class. The test audiences or first audiences sometimes just don't know a good thing when it's in front of them. And then it makes everybody really nervous, you know?
And I'm not sure in Japan, for example, I'm not sure if Leonardo's stardom was the same as it was in, North America and places like, I grew up in New Zealand and he was very much a big star there as well. But I'm not sure. That I think had a big part to play with it. But when it did, get released in the US, it just absolutely was like huge. And even though they had, it was the most expensive film ever made. They were absolutely certain it was going to be complete bomb. And instead, it just ended up, to this day, they have re-released it. In 2012, they did a 3D re-release. It's been released at IMAX. It's, so that, this is a film that keeps on making money. They estimated, 20th Century Fox estimated that 7% of American teenage girls had seen Titanic twice by its 5th week. And, I was absolutely, I wasn't an American girl, but I was absolutely one of those girls that had seen it multiple times. And they said that although young women who saw the film several times and subsequently caused Leomania and were often credited with having primarily propelled the film to its all-time box office record, other reports have attributed the film's success to positive word of mouth and repeat viewership due to the love story combined with the groundbreaking special effects. I think that's it. It was very much a film that a lot of people could watch. Your parents would go and watch it and cry, and you could watch it and fawn over Leo or Kate or whoever. It was very, gosh, you said, Molly, you were what, 9? The age
8 or 9, at best 9. I was born in 89. It was 97. So that's why Brahman and I were like, at best I was 8, which feels young. But hey, I went and the theater was in tears, and it's a like cultural memory that I'll never, it will never leave me. I'm always going to have that, looking at my friend's mom and then being like, looking around the whole theater and being like, oh my goodness, everybody's crying.
Everyone's crying. This is emotional. Yeah, at 9, you're not quite understanding the grasp of like a romance tragedy, are you? You're not quite there.
But again, I got emotional. Like thinking about my dad was the one thing for me being, I guess, that age. Cause like being like, oh no, imagine us all getting on a lifeboat, and then dad being like, it's okay, girls. Like that was the moment where I was like, oh, what? That really sucks.
That's the human component, isn't it? That it's the human element of it that make it doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter if you're a grandmother or a child or a wife or a mother or whoever. You're losing someone in that tragic situation. I think that's what sticks with us today. Fun fact. Supposedly Neil deGrasse Tyson 3 times told James Cameron that he was upset with the fact that the sky was incorrect. So basically, the location of the night sky in one of the scenes could not have been the stars that were shown in the original film. So
The
finally,
constellations
the
were
constellation,
off.
everything.
Yeah.
So the scene, basically, when they did do the re-release, James Cameron was like, "Fine, just send me like the actual night sky," and so he did. He sent him the correct sky based on what it would have been at that period of time, taking everything into account. So I think that's really funny. So the re-release, it's a different sky. One of the things that was really interesting is in the National Geographic documentary Titanic, The Final Word with James Cameron. I mean, basically the whole thing is them trying to figure out, him and specialists and historians and naval engineers and whoever, figuring out what happened to the Titanic when it was going down and how it ended up where it did on the ocean floor. And when you watch the film, the tilt that they have, the boat snaps, and then, which actually did happen, and then it goes up, and he has it in the film in a complete vertical tilt with Jack and Rose at the top going down. And they actually discovered in their research in this National Geographic documentary that they did that it was probably between a 19 to 23 degree tilt. So it's actually
Yeah.
like less. But I mean, again, like you're not going to know that necessarily, and it
And
looked
people
great.
in the water would have been looking at what was the propellers. So I could see that maybe the eyewitness accounts, to them, it did feel like it was that much more pronounced, right? Because you're not supposed to see the propellers. That's a bad sign.
Yeah, I mean, that really was like one of the things. They say that, the film does ignore the Californian, but I believe that James Cameron said they were going to incorporate a little bit more about that, but they felt that it took away from, having to get on I guess, into the mind of this other ship and the people aboard that ship. It took
Yeah.
away from the experience that they were
And
having.
seeing A
So
Night to Remember, because they did do quite a bit of the Californian, I think it would have distracted, mainly because I just got so pissed at that damn radio operator. I'm like, wake up! Wake up! What are you doing? Like, so I'm like, it would have maybe, distracted from.
There's no satisfying explanation in terms of the California, so it's like frustrating to try to show it because you don't really know what happened, but what happened is they didn't come to help, so it's like, how do you like actually make that into, yeah, I appreciate them just leaving it out.
yeah, it's not a necessary thing. And I mean, other than that, there's a line that says that only 6 people were rescued from the water. It's not true. Actually, over 40 people were pulled from the water by various lifeboats. Papers released by the Public Records Office in 1988 showed that third-class passengers were not locked below decks like they show in the film.
There were some separate, like, as you can imagine, even on like a ferry or a cruise ship, there are going to be some like separation areas. Like there was apparently low walls on the decks that caused an issue. There was like a bit of a bottleneck that happened as the ship was really starting to go down. So there is maybe that sort of like somebody had a memory of getting clogged up somewhere, not being able to get through, but it wasn't that they would have like actually have locked people up. And one of the interesting things when I was doing the research about White Star is that they were actually well known and like praised for what they were doing for accommodations for people in steerage, and they were the first ones to do 2 separate areas. So initially you were like all in together, but White Star started being like, let's put women and children and families in one area on the ship, and then we'll have another area on like the opposite end for the single guys. So in terms of, it's sort of like crappy for White Star that everyone's like, oh, and then they just locked them up and they like went down with the ship, and White Star's like, we were pretty good. Like people were actually happy with the accommodations we were giving to people that were traveling third class. They were actually one of the better ships. So shout out to White Star in that
and
regard.
that's what I was going to add. Another thing too was that it's not so much that they were locked, because they weren't locked, but a lot of the steerage passengers didn't speak English, and especially couldn't read English. So actually the problem is that they couldn't get out from under the third class. They like
There
got kind
is
of
a
lost
scene.
in
There
the
is a
bowels of
scene.
the ship.
Do you remember where
Yeah.
Jack and Rose and they go past, I think, an
Yeah.
Arabic family and they're trying to make sense of where to
Yeah, because
go?
Mhm.
it was
Yeah.
really confusing. So
Yeah.
apparently, a lot of the third class passengers didn't get to the top deck until like all of the lifeboats were gone. Not because they were locked, but they just couldn't navigate the ship, and that I think is tragic.
One of the bigger things is the fictional villain of First Officer William Murdoch. He's portrayed angrily shooting at passengers, and then he turns the gun on himself. And in reality, he was actually hailed as a hero for his actions and helping to fill the lifeboats. And supposedly, James Cameron admitted that he took some creative liberties when depicting Murdoch's story. So that was kind of a little bit of a, like taking someone that wasn't a villain in the story and then turning them into a villain. That's a little sketchy. So we've discussed the event, we've discussed the film. Let's talk about the social context. Let's talk about the world in which this event took place in, and then other ways in which Titanic is still taking place in our society today.
So as we've established, the ship went down. It was April 1912. So it took the Carpathia a number of hours to reach the Titanic after the initial sinking. They transferred everybody from the lifeboats onto the Carpathia, then took the Carpathia 3 days to reach New York.
Oh,
So
wow.
they still had a ways to go. And the journey was slow because of ice, icebergs, fog, winds, like bad weather in general. Though that did lead to some confusion in terms of what actually happened. And it was initially, unfortunately, reported that while Titanic had sunk, everybody was okay. That was the first report that went out. So initially they said it had sunk, but all passengers and crew had been transferred to another vessel. By the end of April 15th, confirmation had come through that Titanic had been lost and that most of the passengers and crew had died.
Can you imagine, like,
Yeah.
knowing someone on this ship and being like, oh, thank God, okay. And then finding out, like, what? I'm sorry, what? Like, no, that's
And
that's
the
terrible.
one report, which was actually fascinating because I found it was like the Vancouver World, some newspaper out of Vancouver, BC, like where I'm living now, at the time in 1912 reporting about it. And they were like, it wasn't just like, oh, we think everyone's okay. It was like, everyone is totally fine. The ship is, as we all know, it's completely unsinkable. So this makes sense. Like it was, a very like bold claim. So the initial message, one of the initial messages that was coming through confirming that the ship had actually been lost and that so many had died and perished was coming from Joseph Bruce Ismay himself, because he was the highest ranking White Star officer who was on board the Titanic at the time. And as we see in the Titanic movie, he did get himself off in a lifeboat. So that's another sort of like debatable accuracy thing. He did get himself off. So the fact that he even survived says that he did survive. But the stories from on board say that he did like help a lot of people before he got himself off. And I mean, regardless, in terms of history, he was famously known as the coward of the Titanic for the rest of his life. The writer Ben Hecht, who was then a young newspaper writer in Chicago, he wrote a scathing poem contrasting the actions of Captain Smith and Ismay to quote, to hold your place in the ghastly face of death on the sea at night is a seaman's job, but to flee with the mob is an owner's noble right. So
Ooh.
he was, famously known as the coward of the Titanic. Although, interestingly, he had inherited his position from his father, who was in White Star as well. His father had also started an insurance company. So even though Ismay stopped working with White Star after this and like stepped down and was no longer involved in that side of shipping, he was still involved with the insurance company that his father had founded, which was called Liverpool and London Steamship Protection and Indemnity Association Limited. They were the ones involved in paying out insurance claims to Titanic victims. So he,
Oh.
as his job, not even working with boats anymore, he was stuck with the difficult task. And during his 25-year chairmanship, the quote that I found was, hardly a page of the company's minutes does not contain some mention of the Titanic disaster.
Wow.
So, he had a rough go. Deserved or not, he definitely was very much aware in all of his remaining years of just like he never had a chance to forget about the
Hmm.
Titanic. So news came in, people were crowding to White Star offices. That was in London, New York, Montreal, Southampton, Liverpool, and Belfast. Southampton was hit the hardest because 4 out of every 5 crew members had come from Southampton.
Oh my
Um,
God.
yeah.
I
So it
didn't
was a
know
big,
that.
a big hit. Also, I was reading some stuff that people were sort of like surprised that Belfast doesn't have more to like memorialize the fact that the Titanic was built there and that then there was this tragedy. There's some issues in terms of like the freedom that Catholics had at the time working in the shipyards in Ireland, but also just because it did then sink, it was kind of this like massive embarrassment for the people
Mm.
of Belfast. So they very much were not like, let's celebrate and memorialize this. They would rather have been like, let's just like forget that it happened.
And that's a
In
shame
term,
because the Olympic, which they also built, went on to have a great career. And it
oh
was
yeah,
essentially the
Yeah.
same boat. So it's not to say that they make shitty boats, right? Like
yeah,
the
No.
Olympic was
yeah.
fine, but I can see,
And
yes,
as we
why they
said, it
would
was
want to
like a
distance
very
themselves.
specific, and I think honestly that is partly why they did in 1913, as we said, those like changes to shipping and like they were talking about lifeboats, and the public were very much aware that this has happened. This was a huge story, and people were afraid of getting on boats after the fact. People were afraid of White Star after the fact. So it was something that definitely, in terms of like PR nightmare, yeah, a little bit, they had to grapple with that. Also, leading to the PR nightmare was the fact that an actress was on board the Titanic the night that it went down. Thankfully, she was up playing bridge whist with a group of people and was awake when the iceberg actually hit. She was one of the first ones up on deck with her mother, and they were on the first boat off. Which apparently there was an issue with some of the lifeboats, like they had a hole in the bottom so that if they were sitting on the boat deck and if it was raining, they wouldn't fill with water. But people had to
Oh,
realize that you
wait,
had to
what?
plug it. Yes.
Oh, of course. I'm
So
like, a boat with a hole. That's
yeah.
good.
So then when you were launching, you had to plug the hole. And she and people in her boat apparently were like taking off pantyhose and stuffing it like as they were like out to water to try to keep it from going down. So she had her harrowing experience getting rescued, was apparently dating or seeing a producer at the time, and he was like, "Baby, first of all, glad you survived. Second of all, let's totally turn this into a movie." This was in a month of sinking. So, Saved from the Titanic is the name. It was an American short film. It has since been lost, so we can't actually watch it, but it came out May 16th, 1912.
Wait,
So,
that's insane.
yeah,
Yeah, a month, just barely 30 days. Yeah.
No,
yeah,
what art can you do like in film? I mean,
yeah,
silent, but sure, but like,
yeah. And they used some newsreel footage. They didn't actually have like, there was no newsreel footage. They didn't really shoot very much of the Titanic. It apparently was kind of cloudy that day or something. So they had like footage of a different boat. And thankfully, Captain Smith was the captain on this other boat. So they were like, okay, there we go. It's all good. No one will know. Movie magic. It's fine. She had the same outfit that she had worn when she was rescued.
this
She
is
put that back on.
traumatizing.
She had a mental breakdown.
A
Like
hundred
the
percent.
behind the scenes theory is that she was really pushed by this producer that she was involved with romantically, and one of the reviews was like, you can tell that she's been through a horrible shock. She had a mental breakdown, never acted again. So that's the first adaptation. Um,
Not the
Brutal.
last.
And then just in terms of that like survivor experience immediately following, they were listening to people struggle and drown from their lifeboat until the Carpathia arrived at 6:15 in the morning. So that would have been a
Yeah.
pretty
Oh my God,
horrible.
haunt you for the rest of your
Yeah.
days.
Also, in terms of some like after effects with White Star, the Olympic, which Molly shouted out earlier in terms of like, well, that was fine. That was a similar design and that didn't sink and ran for many years. Yes, but they did have a mutiny shortly after the sinking of the Titanic. And some of the stokers expressed their concerns about the seaworthiness, and they were questioning the hastily installed collapsible lifeboats. They refused to work. The ship was withdrawn from service in October 1912. and was extensively refitted to improve and the safety of the Titanic. So it was like because of the Titanic sinking, they were like, okay. I mean, you can appreciate, you're like, sorry, hold on, our sister ship, the one exactly like this one, just sank into the ocean. Okay, I think we need to take some steps here.
Well, be that feeling of like it's cursed too, like you know,
Well,
like
and
you're
there are some weird things about Titanic. Like, I was trying to find better confirmation of it, but there was somebody who was told by a psychic not to get on the boat, and the psychic had some vision of people in the water, and that was like a famous quote. Like, I found it quoted, I couldn't find a good enough like source on it. And also famously, they didn't do the smashing of the champagne bottle.
Did they not? Well, there
They
you go.
didn't.
That's why. No, I'm
And so,
joking, but
well,
yeah.
right? So, anyways, as we said, the ship sank at like, and that was 2 hours. Massive boat to no boat visible, disappeared completely into the ocean. So, the idea of finding the wreck was something that people wanted to do, like almost immediately following the sinking. Um, as we discussed, there were obviously historical people on board. Some of them were very wealthy, like the Astors and the Guggenheims. So there was definitely an interest in trying to like find not just the boat, but I guess in theory the possessions of the people, like expensive, worthwhile things, jewelry, for example, that might have been on the boat. Another thing that was sort of sad in terms of the immediate aftermath is that they had to triage their rescue attempts. So when they went back to try to pull people out of the water who were still alive, or to even just pull bodies out of the water to identify them, they were prioritizing first class passengers. And the
Wow.
logic behind that was because they had estates that would need to be settled based on identification. So that's what they said, is they were like, we have, if it's Jay Astor in the water, we have to definitively prove that it's Jay Astor so that then all of his money
and
can
how
be.
would they know if he's just like a frozen guy in a life
Well,
jacket? Like
you're kind of going by clothing, right? And I can't remember which member of the team it was who was in charge, but he said something like, if it was crew, they would just leave them. And he was like, well, I'm crew, and I figure I would have like burial at sea would have been fine by me. But like if you were crew, like that was like doubly, like you were definitely not getting on a lifeboat, and then they weren't even going to pull your corpse up out of the ocean because it was like, whatever.
Wow.
We don't need to. We know who this is, so whatever. Um, but anyway, so the boat itself, the wreck, was very tantalizing to everybody. There were many efforts over the years to get it to the idea initially too, like very early on, was like, let's bring it up. Like, let's lift it up out of the water, and then it can be this like museum or whatever attraction that people can go and see.
They really had no idea, did they? Like what
Well, yes, and as
happened
James
to
Cameron was
it?
saying, like they really didn't believe it was in two until they found the wreck. So they were still thinking it was like this entire, like you could just somehow like lift it up out of the as one whole piece, and then they would have it. In the 60s, they started really working towards this. In 1978, the Walt Disney Company was on board with National Geographic, and they were trying to look into bringing it up. They did have a submersible that could reach the right depth. Initially, like when this was like 1912, divers couldn't even get that deep. Like they didn't have the technology to even get down to it. Disney and National Geographic could have, but it was too expensive. So then there were a lot of like crazy rich people that were like, okay, sign me on up. There was a Texas oil man named
Of
Jack
course there
Grimm.
was. There's
Yep.
always a Texas oil man.
So Jack Grimm was out there looking for Noah's Ark. He was looking for the Loch Ness Monster. He was looking for Bigfoot, and he was looking for the Titanic. So he got pretty close. He got Orson Welles to narrate a documentary about it. He was like exploring all these things. He wasn't the one that actually officially found it. Robert Ballard, who had also been trying for a number of years, he had like tried, failed. He got back on board with new stuff, and it was in 1985 that they finally found the wreck. So initially, he just found a boiler he was the one, this is what you see a little bit of in even the Titanic film itself. That's sort of like the character, I guess, that we're seeing in terms of like him trying to find the ship. He found it himself by looking for the wreckage area. So the debris field was what sort of like drew him, and he was finally able to sort of like follow that like breadcrumbs to the actual wreck itself. So they finally found it. He made a documentary. That documentary inspired James Cameron. When James Cameron saw it, he was like, I need to see this thing. This is so cool. Like, this is crazy. They did attempt to lift part of it in 1996, and they got it within 200 feet of the surface, and then the ropes broke and it fell 1,200 feet back down to the bottom. Then in 1998, they did get that section out. So if you want to go to the Luxor Casino in Vegas, you can see that huge section that they removed, which is kind of like questionable. It's the same thing with removing a lot of the like artifacts and other things from the wreck itself. People are like, you should just like leave it alone.
Leave
It's
it
essentially
like
a
it's a
graveyard.
graveyard.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah. James Cameron's first dive to the wreck was in 1995, and he specifically cites Ballard's documentary, which was from 1986, as his inspiration.
You couldn't pay me enough to get on one of those things, even the one that James Cameron. I'm like, whenever I watch that scene in Titanic, and I'm like, yeah, no, I would not want to do that. I don't care how cool it looks. I would
No.
never do that.
No.
It's a
Yeah.
claustrophobic nightmare. Yeah.
Well, it says a lot about how like seductive the wreck is. And then even knowing that James Cameron went down so many times, like you would think that you would have gone like once and been like, okay, I saw it. I did my check that off the bucket list. But there's obviously something about that you're like, no, I want to see more. Like, what else is there? I even found like I was trying to look at I watched YouTube videos of like just the footage, and I was looking through photos, and
I
there
wanted
is
to look
something like
inside
so
much.
it's so
Yeah.
eerie, like to see
Yeah.
that they have like a shot of the bathtub. It was like Captain Smith's
Yes,
bathtub, like
yes.
partly submerged under like collapse.
And they can tell
And then to
that
see something that's so
the plug
human.
is still in it, right? So they believe he
Yeah.
was having a bath or was about to or may have just had a bath. Like
Yeah.
it makes
And there's the wine bottles that you can see just sort of like
Yeah.
strewn on the bottom of the ocean. There's something about like there's shots you can see of like the dishes like still stacked, and it feels something about that feels to me so much more eerie about it than seeing like I know they freaked out when they found the boiler and the boiler set, like whatever it was
Yeah.
that they were like, okay, this is definitely the Titanic. And a lot of the mechanical stuff has survived because that's what metal. So all the grinds and gears and like all of that stuff that's like more technical ship stuff. But to me, yeah, it is, or the shoes are the
I
things
was
too.
just
They
about
said
to say
that
the
like,
shoes. I think it's just the reminder of the humans that were there. It's a reminder that this was once this majestic ship and people were on it living their lives and they had so much more life to live and then in just one moment within hours they went from dining on this ship to some of them their lives were over. And I think that's the thing that really just haunts the whole story but makes us want to know more. And then you get people like James Cameron who's so obsessed with every detail. He needs to know how did it get down there and what happened and where he, in the recent documentary that I watched, and he wanted to recreate the animation he'd made in 1998 or whatever it was to say like, okay, this is where the ship broke and this is what it did. And now we know it actually kind of corkscrewed or did that. And it's interesting because I personally don't have an interest to know those details. I want to know about the people. Who were the people on board? And he does too, obviously, because he created this film and it's part of his interest in it. But some people are so dedicated to knowing these details that are, it's just, it's interesting.
But one of the best, I don't know, most, I don't know, haunting artifacts that they have is the violin of the violinist who was one of the last, like the band played until the end, and his violin was found in a box, like it's in a remarkably good condition. It's amazing. And it was his fiance, I think, that had donated it.
And that's so beautiful in
so
the
now
movie.
you can see it on display.
Because you have that music playing, and they're playing that music as people are boarding these lifeboats in this terrifying situation. And these musicians are doing something incredibly courageous by staying to play to try and help people and calm them. And to know that they actually did that, I'm getting chills thinking about it. It's so moving.
Yeah.
It's so moving.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And also, like, as a musician, to be like, I want to go down doing what I love. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, well, what else are we going to do? We're not getting on a lifeboat. That was pretty clear. None of the staff and crew were going to get on one. So why not spend your last moments if you're a musician, like that is your life, right?
And then
And
to know
yeah,
now what they've discovered with the very recent scans, and they are saying because of the way they can look at the boilers to say, oh, these men were feeding these boilers the whole, as the ship was sinking, they were continuing to feed them. Like, it just reminds you of the lives aboard and what they were doing in those final moments and what they were trying to do to maybe potentially save other people. And there's something kind of beautiful about that. You see a lot of the greed, and you see a lot of, this, of course, in these situations, there are people that will take advantage to try and save themselves. But then you do see these like scenes, like, and in the film,
yeah,
like the elderly couple, and they are, I forget their names, they're historical, they were the, the
Ida and Isadora.
that's it. And they like went down with the ship
Yeah.
together. They didn't want to be apart. And I'm like, that's beautiful. Like, it's heartbreaking, but there's that beauty to it. And I think that's what the film does, is it creates that human connection to the story. And, yes, Rose and Jack were not real. They were not historical characters, but there were people on board that were similar, on these journeys to new lives, and they were completely cut short. And so I think that's what the film does to this day. I mean, I absolutely love this film still. Like, rewatching it, I've watched it a few times and preparing for this episode, and it still holds up. Like, there's some things that you're just like, maybe not. But, I just think, and I think it does come down to a lot of that chemistry between Kate and Leo. I think that's something that, people felt really attracted to, and they both went on to have, incredible careers, and we still see them today in big films and television and whatnot. So it was really interesting. Like, the whole experience, it was an experience, and it continues to be an experience, because we still get things like, I mean, I sent you guys that thing about Bill Hader talking about being fired from his job as someone who worked at the cinema because the sorority girls that had hired out the cinema were so mean to him and told him he looked like Charles Manson, and they were going in to see Titanic, and so he deliberately spoiled it and was like, Leo dies. And I just like, that just came up this week. It's so interesting. Like, here we are still talking about this event, still talking about this film. It holds something, it seems to hold something dear in our society. Like, I think it will continue to do so. All right, well, thank you for joining us today. If you have any suggestions for films we should discuss in upcoming episodes, then send us an email at thismightbetruepodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at This Might Be True Podcast. Please also subscribe to the podcast, and if you're so inclined, give us a 5-star rating. And join us next time to find out what else might be true.